Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. Today we're talking to David Hawley with Wild Turkey Report, and we're going to talk about wild turkeys and the use of fire. And this is going to be part of our Wild Turkey Week. So I hope you enjoy. David, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. I see you on social media all the time, and of course we know each other from growing up in the same town. And I've really appreciated a lot of the passion that you've had for conservation of wild turkeys. So just wanted to say I appreciate that, and thanks for coming on the show.
Well, likewise, Marcus, I've got a huge passion for the wild turkey, and, so many of my memories and friendships, and, I owe so much to the wild turkey, and it's the last several years, it's really been cool to see this upswell of support for, habitat work and a lot of the things that are going into helping solve some of the issues that the wild turkey faces. I'm sure most of your listener base by now knows that the wild turkey does have some challenges, especially here in the deep South. And it's going to take a collaborative effort really from state agencies, conservation organizations on down to the average landowner and average hunter to fix this. But we've all got a role to do. And one thing we've tried to do with the Wild Turkey Report is not just highlight the hunting of the wild turkey, but also the conservation. And probably have done more of that the last few years than actually spotlighting the hunting.
Yeah. Well, the hunting is driving a lot of people to be interested and want to conserve the species, and is certainly a really important part of it. And I think you've done a really awesome job of highlighting the fun of it, the camaraderie of it, like you said, you have so many fond memories within your family and friends, and that's an important aspect of it, and really drives a lot of landowners, which private landowners are the primary landowners in the South that own the majority of the land the turkeys are on, drives them to be interested in conserving the turkey. So, this is a really important thing to think about when we're talking about conserving that species. So, one thing I wanted to kind of kick off with is I know that you've posted quite a bit, and I've seen places where you've been using prescribed fire on your own family's property, and you're, as far as I can tell, completely managing that property specifically to produce a lot of turkeys. Is that accurate?
Well, so just give a little background. So our family farm, it's been in the family since the 1940s, and my great-great-grandfather, or not great-great-great-grandfather, so it would have been I messed that up, my great-grandfather's dad. All right, so he's my great-grandfather. Our family's been in the cattle business, and so he bought this farm in 1940 and cleared a lot of the land, especially except for some of the bottom land, area. So a lot of what we've done has been converting, the slowly but surely away from the cattle operation. We're still, run about 100 mama cows on our place, but a lot of our place we've converted and used CRP and WRP and other things to produce habitat. And so we really kind of came through, prescribed fire. We always knew it was very beneficial, and, had friends that were in the timber industry that burn. And of course, Dad grew up in an era which a lot of people, burn. And setting the woods on fire. So we knew about prescribed fire and the benefits. And so probably the early 2010s was when kind of our stuff started coming of age. It was either, right at that kind of thinning age, 12, 13 years old. It just gone through it. And so we started getting on a prescribed burn regime back then. And the mindset back then was kind of, well, we need to get everything clean and ready for turkey season. We want to
Yeah.
burn this land, get it ready, have turkeys that come in there, the next day, that magnet effect that you
Hmm.
all the time. What we kind of learned through the years was that doing that wall to wall burning was not really the best thing for our property. And so we started, checkerboarding it more. There's places that are, on a 2 year interval. There's places on a 3 year interval. Every stand's a little bit different, but we try to burn around 300 acres a year is our target. But
Hmm.
as it happens, you end up falling short. So we kind of have to establish some of our priority areas. And then, there's areas that are not getting burned that, we're trying to figure out some other way, whether that's, bush hogging fifth rows or something to improve accessibility. But
Hmm.
uh, I'm a pyro. I envy what you and some others do of getting to burn so much. And you've certainly shed a lot of light on some of the ways that fire can be used outside of the dormant season, which is
Hmm.
what so many people normally think of burning February, March, and that's always going to be the peak. But I've gotten really intrigued in the fall burning. Now, this year was kind of an outlier because the conditions were so poor. I had a good burn on September 11th, did a great job in knocking back that, woody stem
Hmm.
infestation, but I had several burns after that because of the ground moisture, were just complete flops. And so I'm
Yeah.
learning a little bit about that. But, really, I think it's important to have balance as a manager and how you use fire of not just thinking dormant season and not just thinking wall to wall burning.
Hmm.
There's opportunities in hardwoods as you talk about all the time. So it's a very versatile tool that really, as I've told you before, Marcus, I think that landowners have to become as versed in this as they are hooking up a bush hog and going and getting on a tractor and bush hogging all
Hmm.
day. I know public safety implications that come into that, but as you know, someone that's properly trained, that takes the proper precautions and burns on the right day, the risk level is fairly low.
Hmm.
And so that's where I'm so encouraged by what you're doing. There's a lot of rhetoric coming through social media now. The social media has its downside,
Hmm.
but done a great job of educating people. And I've had so many people, as I'm sure you have too, that have seen what you're doing, and seen what Dr. Chamberlain's doing, and seen what we've been promoting on Prescribed Fire that said, hey, we got our CBM and we're starting to burn now. And,
Yeah.
we're some of this strip disc. And so social media, I ought to say, is a wonderful tool for getting more fire and more management on the landscape. And it's important for us to keep beating that drum and keep educating people where they're not afraid of it and start to utilize it the way it should
Hmm.
be.
So there are a couple of things that you said that make me want to follow up with some questions. One, so I don't want you to tell me your age, but you said in 2010, is that when you started using fire? Around that time?
Yeah, so that was the first year that we used fire in our
And
under our
yeah,
plantations. Uh,
okay.
so now I've been on probably pushing 100 burns
Okay.
now, which I know for some of your cohorts is
Oh
nothing. They
no.
they do that probably years
Well,
span,
the reason
but
reason I was asking you is, you were already very knowledgeable uh, about managing for wildlife and turkeys before that, and I was just curious not what stimulated you to do it, but what helped you get past that initial barrier. Like we commonly deal with this, especially with people who they're kind of interested in using fire, but there's a barrier to
right.
developing that skill and starting to use it. What how did that play out with you guys?
Well, my dad had been pretty versed in burns and assisted some of his clients on burns and
Hmm.
things like that. I mean, he's a real estate broker by trade, so some of the clients he had, he'd go and assist their forester and stuff. So, and we had through the years he had done some prescribed
Hmm.
burns here, but We're good friends with a number of foresters, like I said. So I don't think we were necessarily like scared. It was more of just getting the plantations to the age in which they could be burned. I mean, it was always a
Mm-hmm.
goal of ours there. And we started slow. I mean, we started small. We didn't try to, light, ring fires and set 50 acres at a time. I mean, we burn little 10s and 15s and
Mm-hmm.
things like that we can manage. Um, that would be my biggest advice to people. Look, it's more time consuming, and yeah, you're not going to get the amount of acres done, but it's just starting
Mm-hmm.
slow and small. Understanding how to, look at a NOAA forecast and see what the conditions are and say, yes, this is the day I do it. And then when you get boots on the ground saying, okay, it's responding. I mean, fire is just something that it's not to be scared of, but it's not to take lightly. And a lot of that just really comes down with the conditions you're burning under.
Mm-hmm.
So learning, you know, what the forecast is telling you and verifying that in the fire that you have is really important. I learned something from every single burn. Uh,
Yeah.
Something the way the fire behaved, when it was the humidity was this, or winds were this, or I did this fire ignition pattern. So it's something really someone needs to do these, whether it's CBM, CBMs in a lot of states, I believe are predominantly classroom driven. There needs to
Mm-hmm.
be a on the ground, shadowing a forester, shadowing the forestry commission.
Mm-hmm.
Textbooks are good and great, but there's science and then there's applied science and getting out there
Yeah.
on the ground and knowing apply those lessons that you've learned over those 4 or 5 days in that course.
Yeah. Well, and I know you shared recently, and I've shared a number of opportunities as well. There's a lot of learn and burn
Yes,
opportunities out there with multiple organizations, and excuse me, and I'm seeing it pop up in a lot of states, lots of organizations, and kind of like you, my what I'm seeing on social media is probably biased by what I put on it, but I do find some encouragement in seeing, this interest seeming to peak in the use of prescribed fire in the South, in particular, to manage habitat for wildlife, but specifically turkeys, which I think most people would agree is something that's really needed at a landscape scale for that species.
absolutely. The learning burns are really promising to me. I really feel that every you know forestry unit, district unit, county unit in the state of Alabama should be required to host a learning burn.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty tall ask, but I mean that's something that can educate people, and not so much on just how I can use it, but okay, how's this going to benefit my land, so that and connecting the dots on the resources. As you know,
Mm-hmm.
private consulting foresters. There's the state of Alabama, the Forestry Commission here will do burn for hire. Understanding the funding, through EQIP and NRCS programs. So yeah, a lot of those subsidy programs, these landowners just don't understand how to connect the dots, and that a place like a learn and burn, they can see a fire in progress and know that, hey, this is not going to burn my forest down. If people that are properly
Mm-hmm.
trained, following the prescription and following my wishes not to crown scorch the whole thing, uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's very safe. And here's the benefits. Now let me figure out how to connect the dots and fund this and make it happen. So
Yeah.
that's kind of as I view, there's one big hurdle to getting more, well, on the private landowner. I'm saying the person that's on the property actively managing. We have this whole other group, to go down a rabbit hole that's not utilizing fire, and they're resistant to it is completely different in a lot of ways than the average landowner. It's a liability and a cost issue, and so we've got to, as a community, figure out how to make fire more lucrative and or financially feasible for the TMOs, the timberland companies, even
Mm-hmm.
your private individuals that own 50, 60, 70,000 acres. When you're in places like where you and I grew up, you're talking about very large percentage of our land base, especially in certain parts of our county, that's controlled by those types of landowners. And statistically speaking, they have a pretty high resistance,
Mm-hmm.
uh, lack of desire to implement prescribed burning, and thus, the wildlife's not benefiting.
Yeah.
So that to me, the two efforts that we can move the needle on are when I say small, I'm not saying 40s, but the small private landowner, and
Yeah.
then try to figure out ways to make the numbers work, the liability work for the TMOs, the timber companies, people like that.
Mm-hmm. The ones that really are their finances and risk are, driving management decision rather than some
Well,
of the other
Marcus, I
resources.
think a lot of it's just what do we really want to accomplish in our ask to them? It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
going to ask Santa Claus for $1 billion, and he's going to give you $100 bill. Well, $100 bill was better than not asking.
Yeah.
And it's like there's certain places on these types of properties that are going to be, I don't know if you want to call them like HBUs areas, but like the area 60 yards off of a main road, the areas that, are a peninsula of two SMZs that are going to have a pretty high value for wild turkeys in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not ask for the moon.
Right.
Let's ask for, just a little bit and saying, hey, I'm not asking you to burn all 200 acres that you thin this year.
Mm-hmm.
About this 50-yard strip. And if I'm a lessee that wants fire and I'm jumping from the rooftops, well, hey, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and help the company put in fire breaks. That'll be my contribution towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So all that to say is I think it's just really about curbing our expectations. I mean, we cannot expect any landowner to burn, 70-80% of their property metric. That's great when we have people that have that much of their property that's treated with fire, but getting to 10 or 15% across the landscape on that sector of land would be a massive win for the wild turkey and all wildlife.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a good point. Not necessarily all of the acreage, but getting just a few percentage points could make a huge difference at the landscape level. Yeah, and that's a good point. Well, related to this on your place, since you've been using fire for a little better than a decade now, and I know that you are in touch with what's going on with the turkeys on your place. Have you seen any benefits? Like, have you perceived changes in the turkeys from that effort that you would attribute to the burning?
I feel so. And this is why I've been, selfishly pushing for more people to get involved in prescribed fire, because turkeys are such a fickle thing in the fact that they have such a large home range that me burning that 40 acres is not going to solve all the problems of the 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 acres around there. I look for incremental, positive trends, and I do see that. But really, the greater area around me, like my greatest role is not just to burn here, is to try to advocate for neighbor John a mile and a half to start his place with fire, because ultimately that's going to mean that the neighborhood, as so to speak, is stronger, has nesting habitat, has better brood rearing habitat, and thus the entire population, because the jakes that he raises, that he's seeing on his place a mile and a half now or 2 miles away, they may be the gobbling turkeys on my place next year. So that's really the whole thing I'm trying to get through with this conglomerate mindset or cooperative mindset, is just everyone's on board with it. The results we can achieve are pretty substantial. I don't think that should ever dissuade someone that has 40 or 100 or 200 acres to burn from not doing it. Going to see positives from it in so many ways, but I'm realistic in knowing that I'm not going to solve all the problems in my general area myself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good
if I can
point.
just save 2 nests, my effort save 2 or 3 nests, and that ends up being, let's just throw out a realistic number, five in each clutch that end up being adults, that's 15 more turkeys that I've helped to raise, and that was well worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you said a couple of things that are important. One, most landowners don't own, at least the non-industrial private landowners don't own enough land where they're going to completely solve the population issues in their area by themselves. That's not necessarily what you're trying to do. We know that most landowners don't have that opportunity, but if you get together, you might be able to do that for your local population. And the other thing is that I hear this a lot. People that definitely seems to deter managing. Where it's like, well, I'm not going to solve the issue, so I may as well not do anything. And you can still have some real benefits, even if you have 40. You're a piece of the pie. You need, help get, even if you're just showing your neighbors that it can be done, and then they start doing it as a result, then that would be a big win right there. But you also gain some other things, like if you're the only place burning, where the turkey's going to be during turkey season. That's another way to look at it. You might gain some other benefits that you enjoy from doing that. So if we could get into that kind of mindset, and then everybody starts doing that, then we might be able to make some real big population gains.
Right. And I think, just looking back, and granted, our numbers have just for the last 7 years have been just in such flux, but even back before then, when we had a really strong population, on just our place, when I saw the biggest magnet effect was when a thinning was combined with fire a year later. Just the understory response was, I think, a little bit more beneficial. We're and I know there's a lot of people on here that have probably seen some of our photos and say, "Man, you need to open up that canopy," and you're exactly right. It's tough to move wood right now.
No, I'm with you.
But it's getting a little better. But when we have our next thinning, hopefully this summer, and follow that up a year later with a burn, that to me is when I'm going to really know what all, because I think that's going to have a huge magnet effect. But I mean, someone messaged the other day about I can't remember where they were like burning in hardwoods. I mean, is it worth it? I said, look, you're going to have a positive response, from fire, no matter what you do. It's just always going to be, I guess the ceiling on it is really going to depend on the canopy, to kind of some pun. More sunlight hitting the ground is going to be more of a better response. And so, we've been getting closer to that second thin age on a lot of our stuff. And so I'm really excited about what this next thin and burn cycle is going to do for us.
Well, there's a couple of things about that. And just to try to make it really clear to folks out there, this is something that I deal with a lot, as you know. People will look at a stand, like you said, we'll see a picture of it or say, oh, you need to get more sunlight in it. Well, what if you have in 70% of your stands? We kind of get this mindset. I don't know why, just like as a human nature thing, where we think everything has to be one way. And we're, we have to thin everything down to a low basal area and burn it. And that's just simply not true. That tends to be the limiting factor.
Yeah.
And we kind of, even biologists very commonly will see, we'll see that response. But the reality is having some closed canopy stands that you're burning under or not burning mixed in with some that are low basal area that are burning would be more ideal. It's just the case that most of the time the lower basal area burned frequently stands don't exist. So it's kind of like a shoe-in, but I like to bring that up because I see that a lot and hear it a lot, and I get messaged about it a lot, and I know you do. Not everything should look the same. it just happens that the thing that's missing a lot is what you just described, where getting some stand, especially right now when it's hard for a lot of people to move wood. That's just limited on the
Mm-hmm.
landscape in
Mm-hmm.
general. So I think that's a good thing for people to think of.
Well, really, and I feel that one thing that I've learned from you is just understanding historical fire regimes, and there's probably a good chance that the landscape had varying amounts of canopy closure based on just different factors and how that fire behaved as it moved across the landscape. So, what our kind of MO on this next inning is, hey, we've got kind of a baseline of where we want the basil to be, so to speak, but we're not going to save an inferior tree to maintain a basil area. We want nothing but our best stand remaining. So there's going to be some spots in there that, they may be really open, and there's going to be some probably be more closed. And so I think the response of the understory is going to be really unique to see and be a little bit closer to maybe a natural stand. And what you see
that kind of variable retention of basal area within your harvested stand, I don't see that very often, but I've seen some examples of it, especially when they're relatively large cuts, where that can produce some really high quality habitat for a suite of species, not just turkeys. That variable retention where you have little patches that might be 100 or 120 basal area, and then you might have other places where you might have 3 or 4 acres that there isn't a tree in. That variable retention could be really valuable, and you actually you may end up really enjoying the results that you see from those stands if you do that intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's I love this aspect of the whole land ownership thing, and I know a lot of your listeners are landowners. Getting to craft kind of the way that the property is going to be shaped. That's what has been neat over the last 25 plus years. Convert this from we just planted another 22 acres. Actually a week or so ago, and so I wish I could press a fast forward button and get it to where there's I'm burning up underneath it, and there's gobbling turkeys in the hardwoods we planted and all that stuff. But being able to kind of craft it, but I think that's something that if I would impart wisdom upon people that are kind of in the same boat that they're about to plant some old pastures and things like that, is make sure that you've got your infrastructure down the road. You're leaving adequate spot off of your field edges and things like that for fire breaks, because if you want to get in there, before that plantation has been thin and you've planted right up to the fence row, you may have a difficulty in establishing a fire line, or you may have to push down some trees, which you don't want to do. So we made sure that we left really large buffers. I say really large, but enough to establish a fire line or clover or things like that, so that in hard to believe in 9 or 10 years we could possibly be running a cold fire under some of that, and we want to make sure we got the infrastructure to do it.
And to me, I'm right there with you. One of the most fun things about having a property is being able to plan out and shape what it looks like, and seeing the critters respond to it, seeing your crops grow, whether they're trees or whatever. That there's a lot of intrinsic value, at least from my perspective, and just being a part of that process. Growing the whole landscape and shaping it so that it produces more of your species of interest. So there's a lot of value in that. I think we just as humans just like to grow stuff. So, think about it that way. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, I have a lot of satisfaction in being able to take some of these stands that haven't been burned yet, that are starting to get to that phase where they don't have a whole lot of utilization for wildlife and wild turkeys, and to be able to take that fire through there and basically, reset that plant community and see what it can benefit for turkeys and other wildlife.
Yeah.
I am interested in other wildlife, by the way. I know I keep talking about turkeys, but that's a really
I think
cool
that's one of the beautiful things
about
this. We have, it's okay for turkeys to drive your decision making, knowing that a lot of the decisions you would make to benefit the turkey are going to benefit a whole bunch of other species too. A lot of those species aren't doing very well. So,
Yeah.
I take solace in that.
Hmm.
I talk a lot about managing for turkeys and deer and quail sometimes, depending on where I'm at. And in my head, as a wildlife biologist, I'm thinking about that more holistically, that there's an umbrella of species that will benefit from it. And namely, those species are things that we're concerned about. Particularly, our fire obligate or
Hmm.
our early succession obligate species. They're the ones that are going to benefit from these sorts of practices. So that's something that I like to bring up occasionally. I'm glad you pointed that out. You're making decisions based on turkeys a lot of the time, but that's not all you're affecting positively.
Right, right. Well, and
Mm-hmm.
you always hear the saying the quail is the firebird. I mean, if they're fire dependent, wild turkeys are fire aided, especially in this
Mm-hmm.
southern pine dominated ecosystem that we live in. Um, you look at a lot of the problems that face the wild turkey here in the deep south, and a lot of it just has to come down with usable space, and that usable space would be positively impacted if fire was implemented on the landscape. So I'm encouraged by what
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing from the private landowner. More people getting fire on the ground. I do challenge the some of the larger landowners to figure out ways to implement that strategy. I mean, turkeys, all wildlife, and thus the quality from a recreational standpoint of the properties that they're leasing out for today's current prices. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
can be positively impacted by fire. So I think we've got to, as a community, whether that's through cost share programs or whatnot, be able to help those people, and maybe um, some I don't know. I'm not saying litigation, but things that could help stiffen
Mm-hmm.
their defense against liability. That's statutes in the state or whatnot. But I really feel like if someone is properly trained and they take the proper precautions and those are documented and they burn on the proper
Mm-hmm.
day, that they should be fully indemnified uh, and protected from any lawsuit, whether it has credibility or is completely frivolous. Fire is too important to our ecosystem for people to have fear of when they've properly used it, they still have risk. And so whether it's a landowner burning 5 acres off or someone that's burning 500 acres in a block or the federal government burning off 5,000 in a day, if it's properly executed and people have the proper training and they're
Mm-hmm.
issued a burn permit, that should be the end of their concern from from the liability and litigation standpoint. That should be something that you know, I don't know if the ability to assess risk in some of these models
Mm-hmm.
and things like that when someone plugs in coordinates is there, but that's something that could probably help these states where they're like, look,
Yeah.
we ran a model on this and they had no risk whatsoever. This is simply an act of God that happened that changed these
Mm-hmm.
conditions. They burn within the prescription that they
Yeah.
filed with us,
Well,
and
there is
act of God that this
legislation in a lot of
is.
states that are right to burn in nature, and there are people who
Right.
lot smarter than me that are working on that kind of idea where we're trying to model these different things, and there are
Yes.
plenty of people interested in that risk. And I think you're right that's definitely a
And that's
one
great.
thing, particularly for some of the large landowners, but it's still a barrier even for the non-industrial private landowner as well. The perceived risk is definitely a barrier, and I understand that. And like you said, that we should have a healthy fear of
Mhm.
fire, right? It's just like you should if you get on a tractor. That tractor can hurt you or somebody else too, and you need to
Right.
respect that, but not let it keep you from owning one. Uh,
Right.
so it's just a different kind of situation with fire, but like we said, it's a tool that our systems need. So, what on your property when you were talking about
Hmm.
these
Yeah.
places, are you only burning in pine stands, or do you have other stuff that you're doing as well, like other hardwoods or openings or anything?
Um, yes, started dabbling a little bit in hardwoods. And through the years, I mean, there's been
Hmm.
places that, we've allowed it to burn into an SMZ and fade that, something like that. But as far as specifically taking a block of hardwoods, putting a fire break around it and lighting it, we started doing that
Hmm.
last year. Small acreage spots, just trying to reduce um, the amount of undesirables
Sure.
in there, get that leaf litter off, and try to stimulate that new growth. And I was very pleased with the we combined one of these stands was combined with
Hmm.
a um, mid-story thinning, or I say a
Yeah.
undesirable thinning. So we left nothing but our water and red
Hmm.
oaks in there, and removed sweet gum, hackberry, all that type of stuff. And so did a really nice job of opening up the canopy. And the fire last year, it was just a low intensity fire. It crept along. I did take the time to go through there and rake around the bowl of the tree. Um, that was probably a little overkill in some instances, but I was very pleased with how I did. I was really pleased with the vegetative response. I posted a little video on the bottom report. I went in
Hmm.
there kind of like towards the end of April, and it was perfect brood rearing habitat. So
Yeah, that's great.
I'm looking for the right day to do that again, that spot again, because it's already come back where it's waist high in vegetation now. Which if I wanted it
Hmm.
to remain, and become a nesting area, that would be perfect. But I think that's something cool about burns is that you can look at different parts of your stands and say, well, I want this to be a brood rearing habitat. So
Hmm.
I may burn this every year. Maintain
Yeah.
that low structure. This right here, I'm going to be fine with extending it to 2, maybe 3 years, so it's more of a nesting area. But that's can kind of
Hmm.
be the architect in making sure you have those places in juxtaposition of one another, that allow turkeys to be in the most critical phase of their life have the best chance of survival.
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Any openings or
Well,
like early
I've been a
succession?
part of those. So Boss Man does Toxie does a big opening. It's
Yeah.
kind of a one of these prairie places that they had low
Yeah.
survival on the pines, and so it really is. It's going to be amazing what it looks like in 20 to 30 years. It's going to really look like an old savanna setting. But
Hmm.
I've helped them with that. But on our place, we really don't have many areas. I mean, there will be some blocks that I burn that it will push into some broom sedge and fescue, and then once it gets a certain
Hmm.
area, it'll play out. So yeah, it'll clean up some openings, and that's a great way to use fire to kind of extend that roadside or extend that opening. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the predominant thing we're doing is burning loblolly pine understory.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, is there anything that, thinking about some take home messages as a private landowner that, during your lifetime, you've started becoming very active with using fire? Is there anything that you want listeners that are in a similar situation to take home from our conversation?
Again, I tell people to start small, start with help, shadow someone, run
Yeah.
to these learning burns.
Hmm.
I'm really encouraged by all the education. I was talking with one of my friends here that teaches biology at the school here in town, and she's actually got her students. They're going to come out and shadow us burning one day, and just kind of
Oh, cool.
learn and burn. For a few.
Yeah.
These are the types of opportunities that we as a community have got to expand upon because we need people to understand. The kids in particular need to see how cool it is because that's going to
Yeah.
spark them to potentially, pun intended, spark them to potentially
Yeah.
go into forestry and wildlife biology and things like that. So Marcus
Right.
Lashley can be out there waiting in the wing. But
Yeah. Come on. I hope
yeah,
not. Uh,
oh, you're famous.
yeah. Well, that's one thing that I was thinking about earlier when you were saying something else. I don't know if you knew my uh, great grandparents, the Lavenders,
Yes.
but I remember a story from one of them, and of course, I was a little bitty thing at the time. I was a single digit age, but I think it was my great grandmother was telling me how when she was my age, they didn't mow the
Yeah.
grass; they burned
Right.
everything.
Right.
They would just go out and burn everything up, and it was just a part of their
Yeah.
life. That's just what they did,
Yeah.
and I always that's just kind of resonated with me. I don't think it led me into the passion for fire that I have now, but it does still stick in my brain as one of the. I have some memories of them, but I was pretty young when they passed away, and that's one thing that's kind of stuck in my head is, whoa, they didn't mow the grass, they burned it.
Hmm.
Like, that was cool, just thinking about it. But it
Yeah.
kind of speaks to what you're talking about. That was a part of their life when they were kids,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we have a whole generation now where they probably don't. A lot of them don't know that fire was a thing. So yeah,
There's
that's definitely another issue to address. I'm glad you're taking some action to do that.
Yeah, there's a great passage in the book, Long Leaf, far as I can see, which is kind of a picture book, but about a
Hmm.
guy that was kind of back in the days of the Dixie Crusaders and all that before Herbert Stoddard kind of brought back fire. But
Hmm.
back then, it was a guy that in Washington County, Alabama, that owned a lot of land. I think I know whose family it is, but anyways, he'd run around and if he saw a thicket in some, in some pine trees or whatever, he'd throw out a match. Just keep. Didn't matter if it was his or not. He was burning
Yeah,
his off. He said, "By gosh, you need to have a clean pine forest for all of us." But yeah,
yeah,
I just back to what you were saying, the take home message for people at home. I think
yeah.
starting small, um, really learning how fire behaves under different conditions and under different times of the year.
Hmm.
I know my track record this year was not great with growing season burns, but if I had my druthers, I would have half of my targeted acreage burn in September and October.
Mm.
I really like the response that you get from it. I really like getting it done and
Yeah.
kind of setting the table going into the winter months where you've got places that maybe turkeys weren't using that
Hmm.
couldn't use in the winter. They're already burned. They're already done. You don't have to go back in there.
Hmm.
They're done. It's just it is a different, as you know, it's just a different animal conditions wise. I mean, this is
Hmm.
so wet. I mean, when it's the middle of September and you reach down the duff layer and your hand comes out and it's just sopping wet. It's really tough to get a fire to burn, especially
Yeah.
as I experienced this year. The tops of the trees would be whipping around and there'd be no ground, no ground
Hmm.
when you don't have the needle cast yet, so your duff and debris is just a little thinner. So, but I've had some great burns that, gosh, I mean, it just looks great and
Hmm.
did a great job in knocking back your sweet gum and yopon and stuff like that. But so that really would be the second take home is explore different, windows. You've done a great job of promoting alternative burn windows in just January, February, 1st of March.
Yeah. If for
Uh,
no other reason, just to give you more opportunity to get your stuff done.
Well, absolutely. And look, we've talked about this a lot. You have done a great job of talking about it, but I can remember some of the years that we just never had a burn window. I mean,
Hmm.
some of the stuff that I would have burned stayed underwater for 2 months.
Hmm.
And, the stuff up on the hills, we never had a good burn day.
Hmm.
So there was a year that we literally missed a complete burn window. And that's hard to believe, but we been looking for those burn windows in say September, October, November, December, not been worried about, one of those deer.
Yeah.
That would have been a year that we probably wouldn't have run into that predicament.
Yeah.
And we had a pretty weak turkey season as a result that year because a lot of those areas were just
Not.
not used for wild turkey. So again, that's the second take home. I guess the third would be to I really like the segmenting down your sections because it does reduce some of your smoke risk where you don't
Mm-hmm.
have 50-acre block. The drawback with that is you really need to figure out how to get some sort of a ATV ignition or UTV ignition sort of thing because I end up walking like 7 or 8 miles on a slow day on those
Mm-hmm.
burns, constantly lighting backfires and strips and spots and all this. And it's great for my waistline, but to be able to burn like those good, really good burn days when you need to be lighting 100 acres because it's just such good conditions,
Mm-hmm.
have just no risk like tomorrow. That's the reason why we're recording today. I
Yeah.
requested Charlotte to pick this up. The dispersion here is like 115. The interstate could be 20 yards from your fire line and you wouldn't have any
Yeah.
risk. The days you need to have as much fire as you can.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to do that if you and one other person are holding.
Yeah.
So all that to say is I think just getting your capability level where on those good burn days, you're able to really capitalize on it. And yes, you've got it broken down into smaller sections, but you're igniting at a faster rate.
Yeah. Good point. Well, I know that you have other things going on, and I'm sure you have other places to be and people to show some turkeys and whatnot. So I really appreciate you again coming on the show and being a part of Turkey Week. I'm really excited about this. I hope the listeners appreciate getting some perspective from folks like yourself that are out there really trying to get things done and have that experience. So I appreciate you taking that time, and I hope that you have a really good turkey season. If I don't get to talk to you before then,
Well, the thing I'm so encouraged about, my focus has just shifted, and you understand this being a dad of now
yeah,
two.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That's all. Now you're outnumbered,
Oh
right? You
yeah,
got two
yeah.
girls. Okay.
Two
Well, I
girls.
got two. Yeah. Yeah. But, your mindset starts to shift from where it's just all about hunting and
hmm
killing that good stuff to where it's more of a conservation mindset and just making sure that they have the opportunities that you and I grew up with exceptional hunting and hunting in exceptional habitat and all that and things that have changed the last few years. But I've been so encouraged in talking to people about the hatch that we had this year. I think that maybe things are starting to align, but I think that we've met the good Lord halfway in how we've been working for this bird.
hmm
And there's a lot of the things. And the places where I'm hearing this is where people are doing a lot of habitat work, the right type of predator control, and they're making a difference over a large area. And so that's why I know that the model is out
hmm
there, to create the best possible situation that we can. Obviously, the rest of it's up to Mother
Yeah.
Nature. But the model's out there. It's just a matter of putting those puzzle pieces together,
hmm
as you said. It's not being afraid to have those awkward conversations with your neighbor and trying to form a cooperative like the deer folks
hmm
have figured out. So it's just there's a lot of positive things. I just think we've got to keep the pedal to the gas pedal. We got a bird that's really 2 years away from a pretty serious problem at any given point.
hmm
If they all wake up one day and decide that, hey, we're not gonna breed for 2 years, that's a species that's pretty much walked itself
Yeah.
into extinction. So you never really get to plateau with your efforts towards this bird, but you got to shift your mindset to where you
hmm
enjoy doing it. And that's honestly, I love hearing turkeys gobble and I love hunting turkeys, but burning is
Yeah.
not very far
Yeah.
off.
I like hearing that crackling too. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
I knew
that's
you'd be
exactly.
a good person to have on because you're actively using fire, obviously, and passionate about turkeys, but I know that you enjoy it. So that's that was a big draw.
And the people that have gotten on board with this mindset and this almost
Yeah.
this lifestyle, they feel the exact same way. It's
hmm
not a labor or even a labor of love. It's something they
Yeah.
enjoy doing. And have seen that for years on the deer hunting side of things. They've always been a little bit ahead of us in the active management. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, the landscape was such that active management wasn't quite as imperative. Today, I think it's absolutely imperative if we want to restore our turkey populations to the numbers that we grew up hunting around. We hold the keys.
Yeah, good points. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's always good to talk to you. Good to see you. Hope you have a great season.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.